Hey team, Jen here. Welcome to week 3. This week I'd like to look back a little bit on week 2, and I'd also like to talk to you about the American Enlightenment. Particularly, I want to focus on its tension with the English Enlightenment. And I wanted to articulate some of the key doctrines of the Enlightenment so that we can problematize some of the readings on the table for this week. In week 2, you continued with your forum postings, and I wanted to pause for a minute and talk to you a little bit about how those are going. In general, I see more students are being serious about the forums and they're doing the full unpacking of their ideas. However, many students still seem to not be using the rubric and using the prompt as guidelines for how to write their forum posts and their responses. So as we move into week 3, I think it's very important that if you are a student who has gotten feedback from me saying things like, you need to unpack your ideas more, you need to show more close reading and analysis or argumentation, etc., then please take that seriously. I do want to see students performing well in this course, and one way to do that is to really excel in the forums. The forums is such an important arm of this course. So if you have any questions about what you can personally do better to bring up your grade in the forums, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can use the general forums in our course. You can email me. You can also schedule an appointment to come to my online office hours. I'd be happy to speak to you more in more detail there. Also in week 2, you submitted your first response paper. And in general, I like to take about a week to read those papers, to comment on them, and to get my comments back to you. So when I've finished grading all of the response papers, you'll receive a correspondence from me either in the course or through email letting you know that I finished grading. I'll oftentimes give you some insights about how to access those comments and what to make of them, how to interpret them, how to apply them to your next response paper. And I always grade papers in the order in which I receive them. So if you submit your paper nice and early, you should get comments early as well. And if you submit later, then you'll get comments later. So this week, we are tackling some readings that I've kind of subtitled Revolutionary Reason. And we're reading texts from some of these founding fathers of America, like Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Paine. And we're also juxtaposing those readings with some of the indigenous Native American readings that are also touting kind of revolutionary thinking. So that's the theme of this week. I want to place, though, some of these revolutionary texts like the Declaration of Independence or Common Sense, which are oftentimes read as pivotal documents for the creation of this kind of Americanness, American thinking, or the coming together of America as a nation. These texts are so important. They're revolutionary in a lot of ways. And I want to juxtapose those with some speeches and texts from Indigenous Native Americans that are also seen as revolutionary, moving toward the vision of what they want this nation, this space, this land to become, and asking for action. I mean, all of the writers that we're reading this week are prompting us to take some kind of action toward bringing this land together and moving it toward their particular goals and interests. So that's what we're really going to be examining this week, and it's so exciting. One of the problems, though, I see with these readings is that the American readers on our list are often considered to be part of what's called the American Enlightenment. And this is something that I've always struggled to come to terms with, because the Enlightenment is oftentimes referenced in terms of what's going on in England. And as you know already from what we've read and what we're reading this week, is that Americans were really set on distinguishing themselves clearly from their English counterparts. They really wanted a kind of severance. They wanted to divorce themselves from a lot of the rhetoric and the government and the ways of thinking that were so prevalent in England during that time. So I find it problematic in a lot of ways that this period of American history is oftentimes referred to as the Enlightenment period. In a lot of ways, it makes sense because a lot of the same dogmas and a lot of the same ideas of the English Enlightenment certainly apply to the American Enlightenment as well. But should it be so? Should we always be reading it that way? I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the ideas of the English Enlightenment. And we want to see if some of these ideas hold up to these American texts, or if America is taking this Enlightenment idea in a different direction, or if truly they're really just continuing to ascribe to the English ideals. So you may know already that the Enlightenment really prized reason. And when you read Thomas Paine, that's going to be so painfully clear that you're not going to be able to shake it off, right? These guys are really just honing in on how important and integral reason is to the success of this coming together of the nation. Now, there's a couple doctrines that pertain to the English Enlightenment that we should consider when we read about the American Enlightenment. One of these is that reason is the most significant and the most positive capacity of the human being. Now, that's a really big statement. What exactly is that valuing? When we're valuing our capacity for reason, what does that look like? What does that entail? And if we're saying that reason is the highest capacity of the human being, then are there other things that we're neglecting? And is that a problem when we're trying to form a new nation? I mean, that's a question to keep in mind. Another doctrine of the English Enlightenment is that reason enables people to break free from their primitive, from their dogmatic, from their superstitious, and even their religious beliefs. So to kind of free themselves from ignorance. That sounds all well and good, but looking back on week 2 and even week 1, looking back on those readings, they're particularly dredged in religion. So how much of that is actually carrying over to the American Enlightenment? What does it look like when reason is enabling Americans to break free from these primitive, dogmatic, superstitious, religious ways of thinking? A third thing to consider that the Enlightenment really prizes is that there's a realization in the liberating potential of reason, in which a person not only learns to think correctly, but to act correctly as well. And I think we certainly see this in the American text this week, in that there is a push, a big push, that there's a right way to behave and think, and that there's a wrong way to behave and to think. Is this something that's fruitful? Is it really enlightening? Is it truly liberating? Because that kind of talk makes us think about law enforcement, makes us think about dictating the thoughts and the behaviors of other individuals. What is enlightening about that? What is freeing and liberating about that? Is it in fact the opposite of that? That's a question to consider. The next thing that the Enlightenment really prizes in England during this time, the 18th century, is that through philosophical and scientific progress, reason can lead humanity as a whole to a state of earthly perfection. So it really, really prizes philosophy and scientific inquiry as two methods to attain ultimate reason and ultimate enlightenment and freedom. The next thing is that reason makes all humans equal and therefore deserving of equal liberty and treatment before the law. So there's this overarching idea of equality in the Enlightenment. And we certainly see that in some of the readings this week, and we're going to see that in next week's readings even more, I think, when we talk about slavery, right? But what about women? What about slaves? What about Native Americans, right? How do we see equality coming to the table in these texts? I mean, the question is, do we see it coming to the table? And should we see it coming to the table more in these texts? And so how enlightened are these texts actually, if we consider that doctrine? Um, the next thing to think about is that beliefs of any sort should be accepted only on the basis of reason. So there's this kind of open door policy. Yes, we're going to accept your beliefs. We're going to accept your ways of thinking and behaving, but only if they are clearly reasonable. Does that raise any questions or red flags for you? And finally, the last doctrine of the English Enlightenment is that all human endeavors should seek to impart and develop knowledge, not feelings. So there's a clear separation there between the mind and the heart, right? We should think with our brains, not with our feelings. Is that reasonable? Is that enlightening? Is that freeing? Or is there some aspect of affect, in other words, some aspect of feeling and emotion that's actually valuable? Can we just disregard it? Being a human animal, is it possible to disregard it? And is it a mistake to assume that we can, right? So these are some questions that you want to take with you as you're reading the text this week and as you're developing your ideas for the discussion forum, that I want to see some of these coming out. So in addition to your readings and in addition to your forum this week, you also have a reading quiz, which is going to hone in on the primary readings for week 3 and asks you to show some critical thinking pertaining to those readings. I've also included some supplementary videos this week that are designed to help you to get through that quiz, such as developing your paragraphs with analysis rather than summary, and how to use author details in academic writing. So those should be very helpful for you. Whew. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I'll see you here next time. Bye for now.